The first bullet punched through the darkness like a scream in a nightmare. Rain hammered the earth, relentless, washing blood and mud into the single dark stream. Lightning flickered, freezing the chaos into snapshots of violence, shadowed men wielding iron bars. A farmhouse porch splintered by struggle, eyes wide with defiance and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not now. A lifetime of quiet struggle, buried secrets, and unpaid debts had finally boiled over. The land that fed generations was poisoned, and those responsible were coming with a storm at their backs. Tonight, the line between fight or surrender blurred in the downpour. Tonight, there was no turning away from the battle that would define them all. Wade Harrison pushed the straw hat back on his head and wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow, squinting at the sky that looked ready to burst with rain at any moment. His family's farm, nestled in the wide, windswept plains of western Nebraska, had been in his blood for generations. He could trace his lineage all the way back to his great-grandfather, who had broken the raw land with a steel plow and a heart full of hope. These days, hope felt as scarce as water in the parched soil. The bank had called him that morning again, reminding him of overdue payments. He felt each notice like a jab to the gut, a reminder that he was living on borrowed time. Yet, even with the burden of debt, Wade hadn't been able to abandon the land. The house, gray and sagging on its old foundation, held the memories of his father teaching him how to drive a tractor, of his mother laughing while baking bread in the worn-out kitchen, of summer evenings when the porch was full of musk and fireflies. Sometimes the weight of that history was what kept him here. Other times it nearly crushed him. He inhaled the pungent scent of diesel and dust as he tinkered with the old irrigation pump that had been giving him trouble for weeks. Rain clouds were a welcome sight. He needed the moisture on his fields, but they also threatened to turn his dirt driveway into mud, which would complicate any last-minute hardware store runs he might need. He'd been on edge the entire day, waiting for the weather to either break or burst. The friction of metal against metal echoed each time he turned his wrench, another piece in the endless puzzle of farm maintenance. He half wondered if it was even worth it to keep patching everything up. A brand new system would save him hours, but that cost was out of reach with the current mortgage situation. As he stood, wiping the grime from his hands, he heard an engine whining in the distance, its revolutions erratic and desperate. He froze, listening harder. People didn't just wander this far off the highway unless they meant to be here or unless they were running from something. The noise got louder, jarring, until he spotted a beat-up blue pickup barreling down the dirt road toward his property. Its tailpipe coughed black smoke, and it bounced wildly over the ruts. Fishtailing briefly, Wade felt a jolt of adrenaline, unsure if he should wave the driver down or run for cover. Times were tough, and desperation made people do strange things. Suddenly, the pickup veered, clipped the corner of his split-rail fence, and ground to a halt near the barn with the metallic shriek. Wade dropped his wrench and jogged toward the cloud of dust. One hand hovered near his back pocket, where he kept a small revolver, just in case. As he neared, the driver's door swung open, and a petite woman with windblown dark hair jumped out, coughing from the fumes. She raised a hand in a universal sign of non-threat, though Wade noticed she held herself with surprising calm. He studied the battered vehicle. The radiator hissed. A front tire looked half flat, and the engine spat steam. Whoever she was, she'd driven this truck at its last gasp. And in that moment, with thunder rolling in the background and his fence post lying splintered on the ground, Wade realized his day was about to take a sharp turn he never could have predicted. "Easy there," Wade called, trying to keep his voice steady as he approached. The woman stared at him with piercing gray eyes, her clothes caked in dust and stained with what looked like engine oil. She was lean, with a smudge of grease on one cheek, and she wore work boots that had seen better days. Instinct told him she was no ordinary traveler, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why. She coughed once more, then cleared her throat. "Truck's acting up." "I swear it was fine this morning," she said, planting her hands on her hips with an air of exasperation. Her accent was faintly Midwestern, but polished like someone who'd been educated in big cities, not open farmland. Could I trouble you for some help? Wade glanced back at the broken fence post. You sure can, he said wryly, though I might need some help fixing that fence. Too, he didn't mention the revolver pressed against his lower back, hidden beneath his sweat-stained t-shirt. No sense in flashing it if this was just a random breakdown. He edged closer to the hood, which was emitting a steady hiss of steam, then gestured for her to pop it. She did, and a fresh burst of hot vapor escaped, making them both step back. I'm Wade, he said, offering a small nod by way of introduction. She lifted the edge of her t-shirt to wipe her brow, revealing well-defined abs and a fleeting glimpse of a dark bruise on her rib cage. Cass, she said, quickly lowering the shirt. Cassandra Lyons, actually. But Cass is fine. Wade noted the bruise but didn't ask. Everyone carried secrets, especially out here where folks sometimes disappeared off the radar. He took a deep breath, then peered inside the engine compartment. It wasn't good. The radiator was cracked, and some hoses looked like they'd been patched more than once. You've got coolant leaking everywhere, Wade observed, and that belt's on its last thread. Cass sighed, running a hand through her hair. Figures. She glanced at the darkening clouds overhead, then back at Wade. Look, I know this is a lot to ask, but is there somewhere I could stay while I figure out how to fix or tow this hunk of junk? Her voice wavered slightly, as if she hated having to plead for help. Wade thought about it. He wasn't much for taking in strangers, especially those who arrived in a cloud of dust and broken fence posts. But the storm was brewing, and the sky already crackled with distant lightning. Where else would she go? The nearest town was 15 miles down the highway, and he doubted her truck would make it even half that distance. He took a cautious step away from the engine. I've got a spare room, he said finally. It's not much, but it's got a roof that doesn't leak. Usually, Cass looked relieved, but also guarded, as if she expected him to press her on details. Instead, he just motioned toward the barn. We can push your truck in there, keep it out of the rain. Then see what we can do about making it run, at least well enough to reach a mechanic. Thunder rumbled again, closer this time, and the wind picked up a notch. Cass nodded, pulling her keys from the ignition. Together, they began shoving the vehicle into the barn, every muscle in Wade's arms burning. The whole time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. Her posture, her bruises, and the haunted look in her eyes told him that Cass was more than just a passerby down on her luck. They barely managed to drag the truck inside before the rain crashed down in sheets, drumming against the barn's old tin roof. That was close, Wade muttered, brushing damp straw from his jeans. He shot a glance at Cass, who was leaning against a rusted tractor, trying to catch her breath. She looked exhausted, though she was making an effort not to show it. He noticed her biting her lower lip in thought, as if debating how much to reveal. Then she turned to him with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry about the fence, she said, flicking her gaze toward the barn door where splinters of wood lay outside. I'll fix it, or pay for it, whichever you prefer. Her voice had an undercurrent of determination, like she had no intention of accepting charity. Wade shrugged, trying to keep things light. We'll worry about that after we figure out if this contraption can be salvaged. Right now, then, I think we should let the engine cool down, unless you want third-degree burns. He reached for a toolbox perched on a nearby shelf, rummaging through wrenches and screwdrivers. Might as well head inside. The storm doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon. Cass nodded, wiping more grease from her skin with a rag Wade handed her. She peeled off her jacket to reveal a plain gray tank top beneath, exposing the bruise on her ribs again. This time Wade couldn't ignore it. He didn't want to pry, but the mark looked ugly purple and blue, as if she'd taken a hard hit not too long ago. Still, she made no move to explain, so he let the question pass. If she wanted to tell him, she would. The house looked even more weather-beaten in the dim afternoon light. Wooden steps sagged under their combined weight, and the screen door squeaked loudly as Wade pushed it open. Inside, the kitchen was small but functional, dominated by a worn-out table that had once been the center of family gatherings. Now it served as a repository for bills, letters, and the occasional half-eaten meal. "Make yourself at home," he said, waving a hand. "I'll see what I can rustle up for dinner." Cass slid onto a chair, her eyes flicking to the stacks of past due notices on the table. She didn't comment, but Wade felt a jolt of embarrassment all the same. He scooped the letters into a messy pile and set them aside. "So, Cassandra Lyons," he said casually, opening the fridge to check his meager supplies. "Where are you heading?" She cleared her throat. "I'm en route to Colorado. I have some private business there. Thought I could drive cross-country, get a feel for the land." Her explanation was vague, but Wade decided not to press. He found a couple of eggs, half a loaf of bread, and some leftover chicken. It wasn't fancy, but it would fill them up. As he lit the gas stove, lightning flashed outside, illuminating the kitchen in a stark, white glow. Thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the windows. Cass stiffened at the noise. Her posture coiled like a spring. Wade pretended not to notice, focusing instead on cracking eggs into a frying pan. The sizzling sound offered a momentary distraction from the thick tension that seemed to hover in the air. He couldn't shake the sense that Cass was running from something bigger than just a broken truck. And deep down, he had a bad feeling that whatever she was fleeing might find its way to his doorstep sooner rather than later. Dinner turned out simpler than expected, a quick scramble of eggs and shredded chicken on toasted bread. Cass ate with surprising gusto, as if she hadn't had a decent meal in days. Wade observed her across the table, noticing how her gaze darted to every window whenever the thunder rolled. She tried to mask it, but the tension showed in the tightness around her mouth. He wondered if her fear was tied to the storm or to something far more human. The storm raged outside, wind howling against the shutters. The overhead light flickered once or twice, threatening to plunge them into darkness. Wade decided to break the uneasy silence. "So I couldn't help but notice you've got a knack for mechanics," he said, nodding toward her grease-stained hands. "Most people out here wouldn't know how to patch a radiator hose with duct tape as fast as you did." Cass gave a short laugh. "I studied engineering in college," she admitted. "Worked on everything from circuits to engines. I guess it's a skill you don't lose once you pick it up." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I was doing consulting work with large companies, focusing on environmental impact. That's part of why I'm on the road. I was checking on, uh, different sites. Environmental impact." "Huh," Wade said, chewing thoughtfully. "We sure could use someone like you around here. Half the irrigation ditches in this county are older than my granddad's tractor, and that thing's practically from the Stone Age." He tried to grin, but Cass's expression remained guarded. When they finished eating, Wade showed her the spare room, a small space with peeling floral wallpaper and a single bed covered by a faded quilt. "It's not much," he said, his voice echoing slightly off the bare walls, "but it's got 4 walls and a decent roof." Cass set her meager belongings on the bed. "I appreciate it," she murmured. "I'll pay you back for the hospitality, I promise." Wade shook his head. "Let's just get your truck up and running first. Then we can talk about fences and money. Storm should pass by morning, and I'll see if I've got any spare parts that can help." He lingered in the doorway, glancing at the bruise on her ribs again. She caught his look and folded her arms, half embarrassed and half defensive. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Wade cleared his throat. "I'll be in the living room if you need anything," he said quietly. "Bathroom's right across the hall." She nodded, her shoulders visibly relaxing as he walked away. That night, while lightning still danced through the sky, Wade lay awake on his sagging couch. He stared at the flickering shadows on the ceiling, courtesy of the old lamp that threatened to die with each power surge. Questions swirled in his mind. Who exactly was Cassandra Lyons? Why did she flinch at every thunderclap as if it were a gunshot? And what kind of trouble had driven her onto his land in such a desperate condition? Rain pummeled the roof, and somewhere beyond the walls, the farmland soaked up every drop. It would be good for the fields, but Wade couldn't help wondering if this storm was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that had arrived on his doorstep along with that battered pickup truck. Morning arrived with a bright sun that glistened across puddles and made the wet fields shimmer like polished mirrors. The power had stayed on through the night, a small blessing. Wade woke stiff from sleeping on the couch, rubbing the back of his neck as he peered out the window. The farmland stretched endless and green, but the broken fence in the distance reminded him of yesterday's chaos. He hoped the day would bring clarity, or at least a workable plan. He knocked gently on the spare room door, calling out a simple morning, before heading to the kitchen to start coffee. Cass emerged soon after, hair still slightly damp from what must have been a quick shower. She wore the same clothes, though they appeared rinsed of mud and grime. Wade offered her a mug. "You take it black," he asked, already aware that he was out of sugar and low on creamer. She nodded, accepting the cup with both hands. In the daylight, he could see more details about her that had escaped him the night before: faint scars on her forearms, calluses that suggested manual work, and the tightness around her eyes that spoke of either worry or a persistent headache. She smelled faintly of soap, a clean fragrance that contrasted sharply with the musty scent of the house. "You mind if I take a closer look at your truck now?" he asked, motioning toward the barn visible through the kitchen window. "Might be able to patch the radiator, or at least get you to the next town over for better repairs." Cass swallowed a mouthful of coffee. "Sure, let's do it," she said, setting the cup down. Her voice sounded steadier than last night, as if she'd made up her mind to trust him at least a little. They trudged across the muddy yard, the morning sun quickly warming their shoulders. Inside the barn, the pickup still gave off the faint odor of burnt coolant. Wade opened the hood, eyeing the damage. Cass fetched a small toolkit from her passenger seat, rummaging through it until she found the right wrench. As they worked, Wade noticed the tension in her jaw every time he asked a direct question. He shifted tactics, talking instead about the farm, the upcoming harvest, and the challenges he faced. He recounted how the bank threatened foreclosure if he couldn't meet the next payment. The debt had piled up after back-to-back years of poor crop yields, fluctuating prices, and the rising cost of equipment repairs. Most people around here were struggling. Some had sold out to big agricultural corporations that didn't care much for local ways. For Wade, selling the land felt like betraying his heritage. Cass listened intently, occasionally nodding or offering a sympathetic murmur. Then she paused, glancing at him. "Have you ever tested your soil?" she asked, fiddling with a broken clamp on the radiator hose. "I mean, tested for contaminants?" Wade shook his head, confused. "Why would I? We rotate crops, keep up with standard regulations. Never been an issue." She hesitated, looking like she wanted to say more but changed her mind. "No reason," she murmured. "Just curious." His curiosity piqued. Wade handed her a screwdriver. A sense of unease stirred in his chest. The question about contaminants seemed oddly specific, and he couldn't help but recall how she'd poked around the old well last night. He tightened a bolt, feeling a bead of sweat slide down his temple. The day was already getting hot. Outside, a gentle breeze whispered through the fields, but in the barn, the air felt stifling with the weight of unspoken truths. They spent most of the morning trying various stopgap fixes, sealing the radiator crack with epoxy, replacing a hose clamp, and flushing whatever coolant remained. By noon, they stepped back to see if their handiwork would hold. Cass turned the ignition, and the engine coughed to life with a rough rumble. It sounded marginally better than before, but still far from roadworthy. Wade rested his hands on his hips, exhaling heavily. "I'd say this beast can limp a few miles, but I wouldn't trust it on the highway," he said. "You'll need professional help at the mechanic in Mapleton." Cass killed the engine and slid out, wiping her greasy hands on a rag. "Appreciate you trying," she said, her tone genuinely grateful. "If I can just make it to Mapleton, maybe I can figure out my next move." Wade pushed back his cap, thinking about the debt notice sitting on his kitchen table. "Mapleton's a good hour away. You can try it, but if the radiator blows again, you'll be stuck in the middle of nowhere. You might consider staying here a bit longer, at least until I can drive you and your truck into town on my trailer. I just need to fix the trailer first," he added with a self-deprecating smirk. Cass seemed torn. shifting on her feet. I don't want to impose. You've already done more than enough. Impose all you like, Wade said, shrugging. It's nice to have company for a change. He paused, remembering her question about soil contamination. The farm, for all its problems, had been the only home he'd ever known. Was there something about the land that might explain why yields had been so erratic in recent years? The thought sank into his stomach like a stone. They ate a quiet lunch of sandwiches and leftover coffee in the barn's open doorway. The fresh breeze, a welcome relief. Cass occasionally glanced at the horizon, as if checking for pursuers. Wade decided to break the growing silence. You asked about soil contaminants, he began, keeping his tone casual. Mind telling me why? She sipped her coffee, eyes flicking to his. Let's just say I've seen companies that dispose of toxic waste in ways they shouldn't. Sometimes farmland is a convenient dumping ground when no one's looking. A cold prickle washed over Wade. Are you saying that's what's happening here? Cass looked away, setting down her mug. I don't know yet, but I have reason to suspect certain corporations of illegal dumping across the Midwest. One of my real jobs, was to investigate these claims. I was gathering data. She looked at the old well, partly visible beyond the barn door. Your well. I took a sample last night. Wade's heartbeat quickened, and I haven't tested it, but the color, the smell, it's off, she said quietly. Could be nothing. Could be something bad. His mind reeled. It was already enough to contend with the bank breathing down his neck. The idea of his land being poisoned added a new layer of dread. He recalled how his mother had fallen mysteriously ill years ago, and how the doctors never quite pinned down a cause. A swirl of worry and anger rushed through him. If Cass was right, he wasn't just facing financial ruin, he was up against something potentially lethal that might have already cost him more than he realized. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the grass in the fields. Wade felt as if it were whispering a warning he couldn't yet decode. He swallowed hard, meeting Cass's gaze. Despite not knowing her well, he sensed this was no small matter. In fact, it could change everything. That evening, Wade insisted on escorting Cass into the house when she went to check her phone for any cell reception. The lines were spotty this far from town, but occasionally you could catch a bar or two near the kitchen window. She held the device above her head, searching for a signal. I need to see if my contact got my last message, she murmured, more to herself than him. He pretended not to pry, but curiosity gnawed at him. Was this contact a friend, a colleague, the person who might be chasing her? He busied himself with the coffee pot again. Though the late hour made caffeine a questionable choice, after a moment she exhaled, setting the phone on the table. Nothing, she said, her shoulders sagging with frustration. Look, Wade began, adopting a gentler tone. I'm not going to force you to spill your secrets, but I have a right to know if there's a real danger of men in suits showing up and trashing my farm. His voice hardened, thinking of the possibility that someone might come to silence her and, by extension, harm him or his property. Cass took a long moment before responding. I don't have the proof to nail them yet, she said, but I suspect a company called Terrachem has been dumping industrial waste across several states. I used to work for an environmental consulting firm, and we uncovered data that pointed toward them. When I tried to blow the whistle, things got dangerous. Her gaze dropped to the bruise on her someone, though she didn't elaborate on how she got it. Wade's jaw tightened. He'd heard of Terrachem, though mostly in passing he knew they were massive, with investments in agriculture and chemical fertilizers. He also knew corporations had a way of skirting regulations if it meant higher profits. So they're after you because you know too much, he said, reading between the lines. She nodded slowly. I was gathering more evidence, soil and water samples from areas suspected to be contaminated. That's why your land caught my eye. There were rumors about illegal dumping in this region. If it's true, Terrachem would want to hide it permanently. Wade's gut churned. The farm that had been his family's pride for generations might be a secret, toxic playground for a ruthless corporation. You think it's messing with my crops? My family's health? He remembered his mother's slow decline. the medical bills that ate into the farm's finances, and how the doctors had used words like unknown origins and environmental factors. Cass didn't reply immediately. Instead, she reached for her phone again, punching a message that wouldn't send. "I don't want to alarm you," she finally said, "but we need lab tests to confirm. If Terrachem's behind this, you're not just facing foreclosure. You're facing a fight that could get real ugly." A flicker of lightning illuminated the distance, a leftover remnant of yesterday's storm. Wade's mind spun as he ran possibilities, calling local authorities, contacting a lawyer, or maybe just turning Cass away and pretending nothing had happened. But a stubborn sense of morality anchored him. If Terrachem was truly poisoning farmland, walking away wasn't an option. Not for him, not for his family's legacy. He turned to Cass with a somber resolve. "Guess we better find a lab that can do these tests, 'cause I'm not selling this land without answers." Outside, the wind rattled the screen door, like a small echo of the coming confrontation. And in that moment, Wade realized he was stepping onto a path that could change his life forever, potentially for the worse. Or if luck and justice were on their side, maybe for the better. 2 days later, the tension in the house was palpable. After repeated attempts, Cass finally managed to send off a sample to a small independent lab run by a former colleague in Chicago. The wait for results felt interminable. Wade kept himself busy, repairing the fence Cass had crashed into and tinkering with the battered trailer that might eventually haul her truck to Mapleton. Yet every time he paused, his thoughts drifted to toxins, lawsuits, and the unstoppable might of a corporation with deep pockets. Cass offered to help rebuild the fence, and he set her to work digging post holes. She showed surprising strength for someone her size, driving the post hole digger into the soil with practiced efficiency. Wade hammered new boards into place, occasionally glancing at her with unspoken questions swirling in his eyes. She wore a stoic expression, as if each swing of the tool was an outlet for pent-up frustration. During a break, they took refuge under a large oak tree in the side yard, sipping water from a jug. Wade let his gaze roam over the fields, imagining all the ghosts that might be lurking beneath the soil. "If the test comes back positive," he said quietly. "What's our move?" Cass took a long swig of water, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "We go public," she said simply. "We gather more evidence, contact the press, maybe the EPA. We make noise until Terrachem can't ignore us. That's usually the only way to force a cleanup or a real investigation." Wade grimaced, thinking of the cost, the time, and the legal battles. The farm's finances were already on a razor's edge. What if they just come after us harder? She looked at him, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. "They might, but the alternative is to let them keep poisoning the land. And from what I can see, you care about this place enough to fight." She gestured toward the half-finished fence. "You're the kind of man who fixes what's broken instead of walking away." That comment settled into Wade's chest, a mix of pride and anxiety. He stared at the horizon where the sun glowed fiercely over rows of young crops. "I've already lost too much here," he muttered, half to himself. "I won't let them take what little is left." They finished their water, returned to work, and by late afternoon, the fence stood sturdy and upright. As they tidied up, Wade's phone vibrated. Reception was typically poor, but occasionally a text or voicemail would slip through. He glanced at the screen. It was from the lab in Chicago. His heart pounded. "Cass," he called, his voice urgent. She dropped the post hole digger and hurried over. He clicked on the voicemail and put it on speaker, ignoring the beep of static. A woman's voice, likely Cass's colleague, spoke in hushed, almost incredulous tones. "The samples you sent tested positive for significant levels of industrial solvents, specifically trichloroethylene and a range of other volatile compounds. This is not a natural occurrence. We need more data. But if your client is living on this land, they should cease using well water immediately. I'll email you the full report." Cass's expression turned grim. Wade felt his stomach knotting. The confirmation was both terrifying and validating. There really was poison in his soil and water, and now they had lab results to prove it. He ended the call, eyes fixed on Cass. She stared back, understanding the magnitude of what this meant. No longer was this a vague suspicion. It was a documented fact. Terrachem, if they were the culprits, had effectively made Wade's land a toxic dump. The words from the voicemail echoed in his mind, cease using well water immediately. He realized, with icy dread, that he'd been using that water for daily tasks, and possibly so had his family for years. If that was linked to his mother's illness, then what else had been taken from him without his knowledge? The following morning brought a stark shift in atmosphere. Wade's coffee pot sat empty. He didn't dare use the well water. He had to rely on the meager stock of bottled water and what little he collected from the old rain barrel. Cass was up early, scanning the emailed report on her phone. Frustration etched into every line of her face. These concentrations are high, she muttered, way above any legal limit. Wade paced the living room, heart pounding as he alternated between anger and helplessness. So what now? We go to the authorities, hire a lawyer. I don't have the money for a big legal fight. Cass, the bank's already on my case. She set her phone aside. Let me reach out to a journalist I know, someone who's covered environmental scandals before. If we can get public attention, Terrachem might be forced to respond. We'll be safer if the story goes wide. He paused mid-stride, an unsettling thought crossing his mind. What if Terrachem finds out we've got proof they already roughed you up once? Right? He glanced at the bruise on her ribs, which had faded to a greenish yellow, but remained a constant reminder that these people could be violent. Cass swallowed. They're not exactly known for subtlety, she admitted. But if the story breaks big, hurting us will only bring them more scrutiny. Our best protection is exposure. His phone chimed again, startling them both. This time, it wasn't the lab. It was an unknown number. Wade's skin prickled with a sense of foreboding. Without thinking, he answered. Silence greeted him at first. Then a low male voice crackled through. Mr. Harrison, it said, drawing out each syllable as if tasting them. I hear you've been poking around in matters that aren't your concern. We'd like to offer a solution that could work for everyone. Wade clenched his jaw, meeting Cass's alarmed gaze. Who is this? He demanded, though he suspected the answer. The man on the other end let out a cold chuckle. Let's just say we represent parties who can buy your farm at a generous price, enough to clear your debts. You can walk away. Mr. Harrison, start fresh somewhere else. Doesn't that sound better than a legal battle you'll lose? A surge of rage lit Wade's veins. I'm not selling, he hissed. Certainly not to people who poison my land. The voice took on a more menacing tone. Think carefully, friend. You have a lot to lose. We'll be in touch. The line went dead before Wade could respond. Cass exhaled shakily. They move fast, she whispered. We must have tripped some radar when we sent the samples out. Wade slumped onto the couch, fists clenched. The offer dangled in front of him like a twisted carrot, a way to erase his crushing debt at the cost of his family's legacy and turning a blind eye to the contamination. But the thought of letting the people responsible for his mother's sickness and God knows what else win so easily twisted his stomach in knots. We go public, he declared, voice trembling with resolve. We do it now before they can pressure us anymore. Cass nodded, retrieving her phone to draft an email to her journalist contact. Outside, the gentle hush of wind across the fields sounded eerie, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the fight to come. Cass's journalist contact, a woman named Pilar Morales, wasted no time. Within 24 hours, Pilar was on her way from Denver, driving across state lines to see the evidence firsthand. This rapid response added a sense of urgency, and Wade spent the morning double-checking the remaining well water, the soil sample sites, and the battered fence line where Cass's truck had first appeared. He felt a swirl of anticipation and dread, wondering if Terrachem's thugs might show up uninvited. Cass paced the kitchen, eyes glued to her phone. Pilar says she's about 3 hours out, she reported, tapping out a flurry of texts. She wants to do an interview on site, take pictures, maybe shoot some video. Wade nodded, sipping bottled water that tasted stale but was preferable to the contaminated alternative. Fine by me. Let her see the real picture of what we're dealing with. If the local press gets wind, it could help too. Despite their plans, Wade couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time he stepped outside, his gaze drifted toward the long dirt road leading to his property, half expecting to see a black SUV idling there. The morning wore on, and he busied himself checking on the few cows he still kept. Cass tried to help, though she was clearly more at ease sorting data than herding livestock. By noon, a dusty sedan turned onto the dirt driveway, raising a trail of gravel behind it. Pilar Morales stepped out, tall and lean, with a confident stride. She wore jeans and boots, a camera bag slung over one shoulder. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her inquisitive eyes swept across the homestead, taking in every detail. "Wade Harrison," she asked, extending a hand. "Pilar Morales, I appreciate you talking with me." They exchanged brief pleasantries. Then Cass ushered Pilar into the house, where stacks of lab papers and printed emails from the soil testing facility covered the kitchen table. The journalist's expression shifted from professional curiosity to visible concern. She pulled out a recorder and began a systematic interview, asking Wade about his history on the farm, the odd illnesses in his family, and the financial struggles that made him easy prey for corporate buyouts. "And you say Terrachem is behind this?" Pilar said, tapping her pen on a notepad. "Do you have any direct proof linking them to the contamination?" Cass stepped in. "We have circumstantial evidence, shipping logs, aerial maps, and now these test results that align with known Terrachem byproducts. It's strong, but we need more to tie them conclusively." Pilar nodded, scribbling notes. "The lab results are definitely incriminating. The levels of trichloroethylene are off the charts. I'll cross-reference them with public records of Terrachem's disposal sites. If they match up with these chemicals, that's a solid lead." A sudden barking of dogs made them all look up. Wade's hounds, usually quiet, were snarling outside, heart pounding. He rushed to the window. Two dark SUVs had pulled up, men in suits stepping out with an air of intimidation. Wade felt his blood freeze. It was as if Terrachem had picked this exact moment to make their presence known, overshadowing any interview with a blatant show of force. "Stay inside," he said, voice low and urgent. Pilar grabbed her camera, Cass her phone, and together they braced for what could be the confrontation that would shape their destiny. Wade emerged onto the porch, forcing himself to keep his posture relaxed even though his nerves were stretched taut. The two SUVs sat in his yard like massive, predatory beasts. Four men, all in crisp dark suits despite the midday heat, fanned out. One, a tall figure with slicked back hair, walked ahead, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him, the other three looked more like muscle than corporate representatives. "Mr. Harrison," the tall man began, offering a thin-lipped smile. "My name is Anthony Bishop. I'm with Terrachem. We heard there was some confusion about environmental matters on your property." His voice dripped with condescension. Wade's pulse hammered in his ears. "Is that right?" he said slowly. He glanced at Cass and Pilar standing inside the screen door, cameras rolling and recorders blinking. The men from Terrachem took note, eyes narrowing at the sight. Bishop's gaze flicked over to Cass. "Ms. Lyons," he continued. "It's been a while." Cass stood taller, saying nothing. Wade remembered her bruise, the hush-hush references to a violent altercation. The unspoken tension crackled between them, with a cool, practiced air. Bishop turned back to Wade. "I'd like to discuss a purchase offer for your land. Our previous attempt to contact you seems to have been misunderstood. We can make all your problems disappear if you'll just cooperate." He emphasized the last word, shooting a glance at Cass as if to say, "We can fix this or break it further." Pilar, from behind the screen door, cleared her throat. "Are you threatening Mr. Harrison?" "Because it sure sounds like it." She lifted her camera, snapping a rapid series of shots of Bishop and his entourage. One of Bishop's men stepped forward, face twisted in anger. Bishop raised a hand to hold him back, then offered Pilar a slick grin. "We're offering a solution, nothing more." He turned to Wade. stepping onto the porch. Name your price. That's all we're here for. Wade clenched his jaw. A swirl of conflicting emotions roiled within him, fear of losing everything, the memory of his mother's long illness, the crippling debt. But the presence of Cass, standing so firmly, reminded him why he couldn't just sign away his life. "I'm not selling," he said, voice hoarse but unwavering. "Not now. Not ever." Bishop let out a small, weary sigh, as if dealing with a defiant child. "You realize what you're up against, Mr. Harrison. This farm isn't worth your life, nor is it worth the lives of your—" He paused, letting the suggestion hang. "Friends." His eyes flicked ominously toward Cass and Pilar. "Did you get that on camera?" Cass asked Pilar, her voice cold, "because that sounded like a threat to me." One of the suited heavies lunged toward the door, trying to block the camera. Pilar sidestepped, her lens capturing every second. The confrontation escalated in a heartbeat. Bishop barked, "Stand down!" But the man had already grabbed at the camera, jostling Pilar. Wade stepped forward, fists clenched. "Back off," he warned, adrenaline surging. In the tense standoff, for a moment, no one breathed. The tall man from Tarakim glared, adjusting his suit jacket. "This is your last chance. Harrison, we'll be in touch with a final offer. I suggest you consider it carefully." With that, he motioned to his men. They retreated to their SUVs, engines growling to life. Within moments, both vehicles tore out of the yard, kicking up gravel and dust in their wake. Wade exhaled shakily, hands still balled into fists. The dogs barked frantically until the SUVs were out of sight. Pilar lowered her camera, cheeks flushed. Cass's eyes burned with anger and fear. The front porch felt like the aftermath of a tornado calm, but crackling with leftover energy. No one said a word, but each of them understood the fight had just begun. The rest of the day played out in a haze of raw nerves and frantic planning. Pilar huddled with Cass in the living room, downloading the footage and photographs onto multiple devices, fearful that Tarakim might try to hack or confiscate them. Wade did a quick survey of the property, scanning for any sign of hidden watchers, though paranoia weighed heavy in his gut. When the adrenaline finally ebbed, Wade sank into a kitchen chair, rubbing his temples. Cass passed him a glass of bottled water, her expression softer than before. "We have enough for a story," she said quietly. "Between the lab results, the threats, and that confrontation, Pilar can run a piece that might blow this wide open." Pilar nodded, chewing her lip thoughtfully. "I'll file an article with my editor tonight, but we'll need more local impact. Maybe talk to neighbors, see if they're experiencing health issues or suspect anything." The bigger this gets, the harder it is for Tarakim to hush it up. Wade tried to imagine strolling over to his neighbors, some of whom had already sold their land to mysterious buyers, asking if they'd noticed anything strange. He suspected that those who had sold might be bound by non-disclosure agreements. Others were too busy struggling with their own financial woes to start a crusade. Yet, he knew he needed to try. "I'll see who's willing to talk," he said, though a lump of dread formed in his throat. Cass's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her brow furrowing. "Unknown number again," she muttered. "I'll ignore it." A hint of fear tightened her jawline. Wade realized she was bracing for another round of intimidation, but he didn't push the issue. As evening fell, the three of them gathered on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. It would have been a moment of rustic beauty if not for the looming threat. The horizon glowed in shades of orange and red, yet Wade couldn't stop himself from wondering if Tarakim was out there, plotting their next move. Eventually, Pilar excused herself to the spare room to write her article in peace, leaving Wade and Cass alone under the dim porch light. She leaned on the railing, gaze lost in the distance. "I never meant for you to get caught in the crossfire," she said softly. "I was just collecting data to build my case. Then my car broke down, and here we are." Wade placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Don't apologize. If you hadn't come, I might never have known the truth about what's happening on my land." His voice faltered. "You may have saved lives, including mine. They stood in silence for a while, the quiet night air broken only by the chirp of crickets. A tension thrummed between them, born of shared danger and the strange closeness that conflict can breed. Cass eventually turned to face him, her expression solemn. "I'm not leaving until this is finished," she said, eyes shining with determination. "Terrachem won't stop unless we force them to." Wade nodded, feeling a sudden surge of gratitude for this woman who had shown up in his life as abruptly as a summer storm. He squeezed her hand briefly, a silent promise to see this through. Maybe, just maybe, they could claim a victory not just for his land, but for all those who'd been victimized by corporate greed. Together, they turned back into the house, preparing for the night as though battening down the hatches before another tempest. Over the next 2 days, Wade and Cass traveled up and down the dusty roads leading away from the farm, trying to speak with neighbors who hadn't yet sold out to Terrachem or any of its shell companies. The responses were a mixed bag of fear, curiosity, and resignation. Some folks slammed their doors outright, accusing them of stirring up trouble. A few displayed watery eyes and chronic coughs, hinting at possible health issues they couldn't afford to diagnose. One elderly couple invited them in for tea and tearfully shared how their daughter had developed inexplicable symptoms. The banks had pressured them to sell, yet they held on, too proud or stubborn to let go. Pilar tagged along, documenting every conversation. She jotted down notes about livestock miscarriages, dying foliage near water sources, and the vague sense of something off in the air. By night, she typed feverishly, turning raw anecdotes into a compelling narrative that she sent off to her editor. The story was gaining traction online, a small snowball rolling downhill, gathering momentum. Yet the bigger it got, the higher the stakes became. One late afternoon, as they rumbled along in Wade's old pickup, Cass asked him to stop near a dried-up stream bed that cut through a neighbor's pasture. She hopped out, kneeling to examine the cracked soil. "It's not normal for a stream to go completely bone dry this time of year," she observed. Wade followed, noticing a chemical odor that made his nostrils flare. He felt a pit form in his stomach. Even if the water had receded, the residue might remain a toxic cocktail left behind by clandestine dumping. Then, Pilar's phone pinged. She checked it and let out a soft gasp. "They're publishing the first article tonight," she announced, eyes wide. Headline: Small Town Farm Accuses Terrachem of Toxic Dumping. It'll go live on the paper's website in a couple of hours. Print edition tomorrow. The gravity of that statement hit Wade like a punch to the gut. This was it, the moment he took a stand in the public eye. He dreamed of saving his farm, but never imagined stepping into the spotlight as an activist, let alone an accidental whistleblower. Cass offered a reassuring nod as if sensing his turmoil. "It's what we have to do," she said quietly. They arrived back at the farm around dusk. Wade parked by the barn, noticing how ominous the horizon looked, thunderheads massing for another storm. He ushered everyone inside to share a quick meal, though tension made the food taste bland. Afterward, Pilar set up her laptop in the living room, eager to watch the article go live and monitor social media reaction. Cass paced behind her, arms folded. Wade drifted to the window, watching as bolts of lightning flickered in the distance. He felt his pulse accelerate with every flash. It seemed the world was bracing for a reckoning, both meteorological and corporate. "Finally, wow," Pilar announced. "It's up," she spun the laptop around, revealing bold black text under an equally bold headline. Photos from the farm, including the well, the test results, and those men in suits accompanied the piece. A subdued cheer went up among the three of them. Though no one was truly jubilant, this was only the first salvo. The real battle was about to begin. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like a harbinger of what lay ahead. If Terrachem's next move was as aggressive as Wade feared, they'd need more than an article to protect themselves from the storm on the horizon. Night fell hard, and with it came the storm. Sheets of rain hammered the roof. Thunder boomed so loudly that the windows rattled, and lightning painted the sky in harsh strobes. The three of them huddled in the living room, half focused on the news updates trickling in through Pilar's phone. The article was already generating heated debates online, with some praising Wade's bravery and others dismissing it as fake news or a conspiracy theory. Even so, the piece was trending regionally, and a couple of local stations had contacted Pilar for interviews. Around 10 o'clock, the power flickered once, then twice. Great, Wade muttered, remembering how precarious rural power lines could be in a storm. His remark proved prescient moments later. The lights cut out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. Everyone, stay put, he said, fumbling for the flashlight on the mantel. Rain pounded the windows like an angry fist, and a sudden gust of wind slammed the screen door against the side of the house. Cass retrieved her phone, using its dim glow to navigate. Pilar's laptop battery was nearly drained, which meant they'd lose their best link to the outside world if the power didn't come back soon. Tension coiled in Wade's chest. He couldn't shake a sense of dread that this storm carried more than just rain and lightning. As if on cue, the dogs began barking, a frantic chorus that cut through the howling wind. Sounds like they're near the barn, Wade muttered. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. The dogs didn't usually spook unless there was a real threat: coyotes, a stray wolf, or worse. Cass joined him at the window, peering into the swirling darkness. Brief flashes of lightning revealed shapes moving near the barn. 3 or 4, maybe 5 silhouettes. Wade's stomach lurched. He grabbed his hunting rifle from where it leaned in the corner. "You two stay inside," he said firmly. But Cass bristled. "Not a chance. I'm coming with you. This is about me, too." Pilar, for her part, pulled out her camera, half whispering that she'd film what she could. They stepped onto the porch, battered by wind and rain. Thunder roared overhead, and in the fleeting brilliance of lightning, Wade glimpsed men in black rain slickers pushing open the barn doors. One dog lunged, teeth bared, and was kicked away with a vicious snap. Wade's blood boiled. "Hey," he shouted, racking the rifle. "Get off my property!" A flash of lightning revealed the men turning toward him, their faces shadowed. One raised what looked like a crowbar or pipe, another jerked his head, and they fanned out. Cass clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight, casting a stark beam across the muddy yard. The storm was deafening, but above the roar of wind, Wade could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The men advanced, slow but purposeful. Adrenaline surged. He fired a warning shot into the air. The muzzle flash lit the rain-soaked yard. "I said, get back," he roared. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a burst of determination, the intruders rushed forward, weapons raised. Pillar screamed something that got lost in the cacophony. Wade braced himself, about to chamber another round. Cass positioned herself at his side, brandishing a metal wrench like a makeshift club. This was the fight they dreaded: Tarakim, or their hired thugs, come to silence the whistleblowers by any means necessary. What followed felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Rain pelted them so hard it was difficult to see or breathe. Lightning strobed the yard, creating a jarring, flickering tableau of violence. One of the intruders lunged at Wade, swinging a metal bar. Wade managed to sidestep, the bar grazing his shoulder. With a strangled cry, he staggered but stayed upright, raising the rifle again. He couldn't get a clean shot, not without risking Cass or the dogs. Cass darted forward, wrench in hand, and delivered a swift blow to the assailant's midsection. He doubled over with a wheeze, dropping the bar into the mud. Another man, taller and broader, slammed into Cass from behind, sending her sprawling. Wade whipped the rifle butt around, cracking it into the taller man's ribs. The man cursed, stumbling back. Meanwhile, Pilar stood on the porch, filming with trembling hands, her camera capturing every explosive clap of thunder, every desperate shout. In the glare of sporadic lightning, the lens documented the corporate thugs waging a midnight assault. One intruder noticed her filming, snarled, and charged toward the porch steps. Pilar cried out, backing away, but the man was fast. He smacked the camera aside, knocking it to the floorboards. She scrambled to retrieve it, but he grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. A furious bark cut through the darkness, and one of Wade's dogs leaped at the attacker, teeth sinking into the man's arm. He screamed, releasing Pilar. She rolled away, clutching her bruised wrist. The dog held on, refusing to yield, until the intruder flung it off violently. Wade's vision blurred with rage. He targeted that man with the rifle, but the chaos made a clean shot impossible. Suddenly, a brilliant arc of lightning illuminated the yard, exposing the grim scene in stark clarity. Cass, muddy and soaked, scrambled to her feet, swinging her wrench at the tall man again. This time, she connected with a solid thud. The man collapsed to his knees, groaning. Another intruder pressed forward, brandishing a pistol, a new and terrifying escalation. Wade's stomach lurched. He pulled the trigger without hesitation, aiming low. The shot cracked the air, and the man screamed as he dropped the gun, clutching his leg. In the aftermath of that gunshot, a hush settled, broken only by rain and the hiss of breath through clenched teeth. The remaining intruders seemed to reconsider, exchanging frantic looks. One barked an order that was drowned by a thunderclap, and they scrambled to grab their injured comrades. Within seconds, they were retreating, limping toward a black SUV that had crept up the driveway with its headlights off. The vehicle's engine roared, and the men piled in, leaving the barn doors ajar and the ground littered with footprints, a dropped crowbar, and spatters of blood. Wade lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Cass, battered but unbowed, staggered to his side. Their eyes met in the flicker of lightning. The raw adrenaline on her face mirrored his. Pilar, still on the porch, clutched her camera, tears mingling with the rain that streamed down her cheeks. The SUV reversed away, taillights disappearing into the tempest. The dogs barked at the emptiness left behind, as if cursing the cowards who had fled. In that moment, Wade knew everything had changed. Tarakem had escalated this fight to brutal violence. There was no going back. As the rain eased to a lingering drizzle, he felt Cass's hand on his arm steadying him, or maybe steadying herself. The storm had broken, but the real battle was only intensifying. They would take these wounds physical, emotional, and turn them into fuel for the farm, for justice, for a future that refused to be stolen. Wordlessly, they guided each other inside, leaving muddy footprints on the porch. The battered camera still recorded, capturing the final image of a tattered farm standing defiantly in the face of greed and cruelty. None of them could predict the full fallout of that night's events, but they knew one thing for certain: they would fight with every ounce of strength they had, come what may. As the sun crests over the fields, warming the land scarred by struggle, it's clear this farm has endured storms far greater than nature alone could conjure. A legacy preserved, but not without sacrifice. Every fence rebuilt, every bruise healed, every memory carried forward. They each whisper of resilience and the courage to stand when standing seemed impossible. What began as a chance encounter, a truck broken down at the edge of nowhere, turned into something deeper, a fight for truth, a stand against shadows far bigger than one person's troubles. It cost them peace, sleep, maybe even innocence. But from that turmoil, they reclaimed dignity, purpose, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing you have done the right thing, no matter the price. Yet as shadows grow longer and twilight settles gently across the fields, we wonder about the silent battles around us, about stories left untold and sacrifices unseen. Perhaps the greatest bravery lies in those quiet moments when no one is watching, when the choice to fight or surrender rests solely with us. And as the farmhouse fades softly into dusk, you might ask yourself, if the time came, could you find the strength to hold your ground against the storm?